Am I the idiot? For letting my daughter call her aunt by the wrong name? My wife 42F and I 46M have a beautiful daughter 15 whom we love to death. Because it's relevant, I'll mention that until about 2 years ago, she was our son. We had a lot of, I'll be charitable and say, unlearning to do when this all happened, and it wasn't the smoothest ride for our daughter, I'm ashamed to say, but we're in a better place now and trying. Her therapist told us early on that our daughter might want to try on a few names before she found one that fit. Then our daughter proved that wrong, we thought, by jumping on one, let's say Bethany, and sticking to it. After 6 months of going by Bethany, it looked like a done deal. I just want to say here that while neither of us handled things perfectly at the start, my wife took longer to come around than I did. Bethany's birth name in particular had a personal significance to my wife, so the whole name thing has been difficult, period. August of 2019, Bethany's about to start high school and decides she wants a completely fresh start, name included. She told us she wanted to try Ellie. Then a few months later, Liz. Credit where credit's due, she was very patient with her mom and I, because we slipped up a lot, and she'd just gently remind us. But my wife didn't handle it well. She'd get defensive or sarcastic, roll her eyes, that sort of thing. It led to a couple of arguments between her and I. Liz stuck, but then a couple of weeks ago my wife overheard a friend of our daughter online calling her another name, let's say Maggie. She confronted her about how she'd been trying on Maggie for a while, just with friends, and had been reluctant to tell us. I wasn't there, but apparently my wife just kind of walked away with a fine, whatever type of thing. The last couple of weeks we've been making the new name a habit, but I guess my wife's been stewing. We were all on a Zoom call with my sister. My younger nephew called my daughter Liz, my sister corrected him, and my wife jokingly said, "Oh, let him call her what he wants, she'll have a new one next season anyway." Long story short, Zoom call awkwardly ended early, daughter went straight to her room, and I headed out with my wife. Her side daughter can't keep changing names like this, it's hard enough for wife without all the extra changes, and she's just trying to get attention. My side, we were warned years ago this might happen, it's our daughter's decision to make, and being sarcastic and making fun of her is just going to make things worse for Maggie. So now I'm lying awake wondering if I'm an asshole. I still think I'm right, but my wife really has been trying this aside and we've both had our shitty moments on this. Sorry for the long read, but am I the idiot? Edit. This has been very reassuring and eye-opening. I'm still replying to comments, but in case I nod off, thank you all. I'll be talking to my wife tomorrow morning, and if she and my daughter are okay with it, I'll try to post an update. Edit 2. Holy crap. There were a couple of new comments when I checked my phone this morning, and now there are more. My wife and I sat down, it's been a very good morning, and I'm going to write an update. Edit 3. Update may or may not get approved, we'll see. Before I do that, I'll duck down and try to respond to a few comments I saw that I feel very inclined to respond to, for one reason or another. But I want to repeat how grateful I am for all of the insights, perspectives, and voices of support. Edit 4. I need to assure you all that my wife had been very supportive of the transition and that the name issue seemed to be an unusual and significant trigger. And for anyone who implied it, no, my daughter is not the asshole. Update 1. Today I learned you can make posts to your own profile. Convenient. So, my wife and I sat down this morning and talked. I told her I came here looking for insight and offered to show her the post, but she didn't feel like she needed to see it. Turns out she'd been thinking about it too, surprise. It turns out my hunch about this whole thing was kind of right. I didn't share this yesterday because I didn't want to without my wife's permission, but the year we had Maggie, my wife's father, will call him George, here, passed away. He'd been sick for some time, and we were praying he'd live to meet his grandchild, but that didn't happen, and it was devastating for my wife. When Maggie was born, we decided to name her George, obviously not her real birth name, after him. The other important thing to understand here for context is that my daughter looked so much like her grandfather. The way my wife tells it, it was like having him back in her life again, and she took a lot of comfort from that. More than either of us realized, I think. That ended up being what my wife and I talked about this morning. I mentioned all the other things that had been going so well and how they'd been bonding, and asked why the name was such a hot button, and after a bit of back and forth she kind of blurted out, "Every time she does it, it's like my dad died again." So, that answered a lot. We talked for a while about it, and we're nowhere near all the answers, but it looks like seeing our daughter transition brought a whole lot of grief back to the surface, and even though she's at peace with most of the transition and loving some of it, learning a new name for Maggie stuck the knife right back in each time it happened. I'm certain there's more to it, and we talked about therapy. She's reluctant but coming around, but it's a start. After we were done, and Maggie was awake, we went and talked to her. My wife apologized, and we told Maggie some of what was going on. Maggie, bless her, was trying to apologize too, but we told her she had nothing to be sorry for. It was a good talk and a couple of suggestions from the last post came up. They hugged it out, there were tears, it's a start. Anyway, that's where we are now. Since I have the space, I just want to address a couple things that came up yesterday. 1. For those who were worried my wife burned the bridge with Maggie, well, she is getting her butt kicked at Mario Kart as we speak, so I think there's hope. 2. Big thanks to all the transgender excellent people who chimed in with their own experiences. That was a big help, and it made my wife relax a little knowing Maggie's experience isn't uncommon. 3. We both know we're not quite done adjusting to our daughter's new identity, but I just wanted to reassure everyone that the conversation isn't stopping here. We had a good day after a bad LLB, more of them, I'm sure. 4. I mentioned this in my replies yesterday, but for those who were wondering, Maggie's first few name choices were based on characters in games or stories she liked, but she says the one she settled on is the first one that felt right, and there's a deeper meaning to it for her, so this might be the one that sticks. But if not, well, it's okay. Thanks again all. You're good people. Update to my beautiful daughter Maggie turned 16 last month and is trans relevant. Over the summer we moved halfway across the country. Mixed experience for Maggie. Obviously, it was hard for all the usual reasons, but she was excited to start fresh. For context, she passes very well. She more or less looks young for her age. So, in the lead up to September, she told us that she didn't want to be out at her new school. She wanted people to just know her as a girl, not as a trans girl. I admit, my wife and I weren't sure what to make of this, but she seemed happy. She quickly made friends with several other girls her age, especially one girl, Brittany. Important soon. Things were going smoothly, and we relaxed a bit. Then Friday I get a text from Maggie's best friend back home, we'll call her Jenna, asking either me or my wife to call her, and not to tell Maggie yet. Basically, Maggie has been hanging out with both Jenna and Brittany online, and Brittany would sometimes say very transphobic things along the lines of trans women not being real women, or they're gross, you get the idea, and Maggie would laugh along and agree. Apparently, Jenna privately called her out, and Maggie begged her not to say anything or out her, said Brittany was an amazing friend otherwise, so on. Jenna, bless her heart, didn't want to be cut off from Maggie, so she agreed. So then last week they were hanging out and Brittany made a comment about some pervert at school, and Maggie tries to change the subject, but it all comes out anyway. There's another trans girl at the school and Brittany has been bullying her. In front of with friends. Including Maggie. And Maggie has done nothing to help this poor girl or distance herself from Brittany. This led to a massive fight between Jenna and Maggie, and they haven't spoken since. Now Jenna figures if she can't salvage her friendship with Maggie, she can at least maybe help her by telling us. I exploded. I don't have room for details, but I tore a strip off Maggie for being a part of this, confiscated her phone, grounded her, and told her never to speak to Brittany that group again. This shot her weekend plans to hell. It's been 2 days, and she hasn't spoken to me since. My wife has been on my team in front of Maggie and is horrified by what's been going on, but she thinks that we can't expect to forbid teenagers from seeing one another, and I've now cut Maggie off from some of the only friends she has out here. But I just don't get it. I've tried talking to her, but she just won't, and I don't want to push her too hard. Her mother convinced her to bump up her next appointment with her therapist, grudgingly, but otherwise she hasn't had much luck either and she thinks we made a mistake. So, here I am. I feel badly for the way I reacted, but I also don't see how else I could have. My little girl is enabling a transphobic bully, and I don't see how she can live with herself. Every time I think about it, I just see red. Am I the idiot? Edit. Reading everything here helped. I appreciate all of you. My wife has just opened the post to read for herself too. We will be sitting down and talking with Maggie today, and I will apologize for the way I reacted, and we'll go from there. I'm terrified about what I might hear, but if I can help it, I can't just let her go back to school with all this. Edit. To a few folks may have missed this in my post. Yes, she does have a therapist that she sees regularly. That was one of the first things we did when she came out to us. As I mentioned above, we're getting her an urgent appointment to help her deal with this. Edit. 3 Update. I sat down with her and apologized for losing my temper. I told her I wasn't mad anymore, just scared for her, and that I wanted to help. I said we would need to solve this, but we'd do it together, and that my wife and I would give her a little time to think about it, if she needed it. And then she just about disintegrated. She was sobbing and couldn't even get words out. Her mom and I held her and let her cry it out. After that I asked if she was ready to talk about it, and she said she wanted a little space first to put herself together, but she said she knows how much of a mess this is and that it needs fixing. So that's where we are now. We're letting her collect herself and calm down, And I'm typing this while her mom puts together late lunch for her, and after she's eaten, we'll talk and go from there. Not sure if I'll be able to update, but I'll try. Thank you again everyone for your help and insight. Update 4. Hi folks. I'm updating here because I think this update will probably end up being too long to add to my original post, and I know I don't meet the update criteria, but I thought I'd fill in those of you who were concerned. I do have Maggie's permission to share. So, after Maggie had her cool down and her lunch, her mom and I sat down and hashed everything out. Before I go any further, I'm going to do what a few other commenters on the post did and give a shout out to Jenna. For what she already did, yes, but there's more. Maggie evidently put 2 and 2 together, figured out Jenna was the one who told us what was going on, and sent her an irate message on her laptop, which would let her keep because homework. She showed us the message. I'm not going to quote it here, but suffice it to say it was pretty long and ugly, sent the same night I'd gone off on her. Probably would have been a friendship ender to anyone else. Not Jenna, bless her. 3 paragraphs of awful, and Jenna's response was, "Are you okay? Do you need to talk?" Which they did, yesterday. I think Mags gave her the silent treatment until then. She didn't say. They got on a call, they talked, they cried. And they're good now, pending how all this turns out, and I can blame Jenna for that? But Maggie did say with lots of difficulty that she was feeling trapped in a no-win situation and had been so scared of us finding out about this Brittany thing because she didn't think we'd understand, and we'd probably hit the roof. Oops. I think she had it in her head that she could get through to Brittany and work it all out. Fix her, you know. So, when we did find out, the whole thing came crashing down. Most of the folks who commented on my post were right on the money, and I'm ashamed I didn't see it or maybe take the time to think about it before I got so angry the other day. She and Brittany were well into their friendship and Maggie was very much part of the group before any of this came up, and once it did, Maggie was so terrified of what would happen if she were outed that she felt all she could do was play along. But of course, there's more. It turns out the other trans girl, the victim, she needs a name, so I'm calling her Emily as a new kid, on top of everything else, and from the sound of it, an impressive new kid. She transferred to Maggie's school toward the beginning of December, around the time Jenna started noticing the off-color comments. And apparently Emily is out and proud. Like, trans flag buttons on her shirt proud. But there's more, strap in. I mentioned in 1 or 2 comments that I spent some of the weekend getting a hold of Brittany's parents, and that they were a collective piece of work. What I found out was that they have been repeatedly complaining to the school about Emily, playing the role of concerned parents because of all the usual bullshit reasons, pardon my French. Props to the school here because it sounds like Brittany's folks were politely told to go make sweet love to a tree stump. I might be paraphrasing, and that Emily has as much of a right to her identity as anyone else. So, of course, enter Brittany, and anyone who will listen to her. The way Maggie tells it, at first it was just Brittany making the odd comment here and there, about her parents or Emily or whatever. We did pause here and stress how much we wished Maggie could have talked to us then. And she agreed that it might not have gotten this bad, but she, you know, thought she could fix it. Then we were on winter break, then COVID shut down the school for a week and classes were online, so it wasn't until just last week that things got particularly ugly. I was relieved to hear that there was only 2 incidents Maggie witnessed. One was a throwaway comment as Brittany et al. Passed Emily in a hallway. The other, the one that sparked this whole thing, was a day or 2 after that, started a similar way in passing outside the building. And Emily stopped this time and called Brittany out. They got into it, words were exchanged, Maggie just kind of froze. Apparently, Emily called the lot of them transphobic bitches and that hit Maggie pretty hard. She also told us she hadn't really meant to be completely stealth at first, more so just that she wouldn't bring it up, and if someone asked, she wouldn't lie. But again, comments, chef's kiss. She got caught up in the excitement of being seen as a cis girl, and then all this happened before the subject came up. Christ, this is a lot. Sorry. All that pretty much brings us to this weekend, where things went south. I think the fact that I blew up the way I did kind of put things in perspective for her. Like, she knew I'd be mad about all this, but that mad, apparently not. But as I was scared of losing Brittany, scared of being outed, and thought she could fix it. So, then we found out about today, and Maggie had to stop and cry again because she was so afraid to show us. I'm guessing I set something off when I talked to Brittany's parents because Brittany's on there sympathizing with Maggie and talking shit about Emily because it's all Emily's fault Maggie can't hang out with them this weekend. And duck. These messages are awful. Maggie's apparently been glued to Jen all day via her laptop trying to just deal with all the horribleness. And Maggie says nothing else from before was ever this bad. My wife asked her what she wanted to do now, to which Mags channeled her inner pumpkin spice and told us she can't even with Brittany right now. Which I clarified meant, she knows the friendship is over, but she doesn't have any clue how to do it. She doesn't want to come out to her, naturally, but she feels like she's going to get nothing but questions. Since there's no school tomorrow, we're going to sit down with her and brainstorm. I asked her what she would do about Emily, because I still think that because she was a part of this, she has some level of responsibility to help make things right. I was thinking an apology, which she agreed to, but then Maggie shows me screenshots of all the messages Brittany sent about Emily that morning, along with some of the ones from before the drama, which she'd been furiously finding and saving while she ate her lunch, and she says she wants to take them to the VP at the school. And I'm like, duck in A. So, that's where we are now. I'm proud as hell of Maggie, and also scared as hell of what she's going to have to deal with when all the shit hits the fan. I don't know what the school can do with Maggie's screenshots. I guess we'll have to see. Wifey and I are going to sit in on a call to Jenna tonight, with Maggie, because we both agreed with what several of you said she deserves credit for being absolutely top-notch here. And Maggie's therapist had a cancellation tomorrow, praise Jesus, so there's that too. I want to thank everyone again for everything. There will be more that happens, this isn't done, but for now I'm done updating. I'm going to go cuddle with my daughter and watch a terrible movie. Edit Jesus Murphy. This all got far more attention than any of us were prepared for, Maggie included, but the outpouring of support has been phenomenal. I have decided I'm not, for the most part, going to try to respond to the massive orchard of comments here. But I do want all of you to know I'm reading every single one, sharing the advice and perspectives with Maggie and her mom, and feeling downright humbled. When I have more time, I'll come back and try to address some recurring themes in the comments, but for now, thank you all. Love you all. Update 5 to 5 months later. So, I forgot about this account again, and then randomly remembered it today. I have no idea how many people will see this, but in case some of those who saw my last one happen to stumble across it, I figured I might as well let you know how things shook down. Recap: my daughter Maggie is trans, was apparently involved in bullying another trans girl at the school. I flipped my shit. We found out it was mostly about the other girls in the group and Maggie didn't know how to deal. Here are the links to part 1. I'm going to make it shorter, or at least try. Not a lot of melodrama. And I have Maggie's permission to share. Actually, she was the one who reminded me of it this morning. Kind of a "hey dad, whatever happened to" type of thing. The most important news is that things are okay. Not perfect, but okay. There were great points brought up by those who left comments on the last post, and rest assured they helped us figure things out. I'm doing this in bullet points for my own sake, so bear with me. The Reddit post. Some folks pointed out that there was enough detail in my post, and it was getting enough attention, that it could be tracked down by someone at the school, and after the first comment along those lines I swore at myself and then sat Maggie and her mother down about it. Long story short, Maggie told me to leave it up because 1, taking it down at that stage probably wouldn't make a difference, 2, the overwhelming support was helping her and her mother and I get through it, and 3, she pretty much said if people find out, they find out. As far as we know, it didn't happen. Not ruling it out, but if someone at the school saw, it never got back to Maggie. Therapy. Maggie's therapist has been wonderful. When this all hit the fan, we had her on once-a-week appointments for a while, but we've been able to ease back and Maggie's in a better spot. Maggie being stealth. I won't say she decided to come out, as it were, but she realized she drifted pretty far from her original outlook when she went to this school, which was "I won't advertise it, but if people find out, it's no big deal." We and her therapist did a lot of unpacking about that and thank Duck for her therapist, because I have felt so out of my depth here, but long story short, she's come back around to that since she distanced herself from Brittany and that group. Brittany. There were a few comments pointing out that Maggie didn't owe Brittany anything, and that block delete would be totally okay in a scenario like this. Good advice. Maggie chose not to do it that way, partly I think because she felt guilty for not speaking up sooner about the awful stuff Brittany said, and partly because she wanted Brittany to know exactly why they couldn't have a friendship anymore. More proof, if any was needed, that she's a lot more courageous than I am. I don't think it needs to be said that Brittany didn't take it well, but Maggie did come away from it with one consolation prize: another girl in the group who had been similarly secretly uncomfortable with Brittany. We can call her, I wasn't thrilled about it at first, but when Brittany and the remaining girls in that group were slinging mud after the fact, it meant neither of them had to deal with it solo. Thankfully, it stopped before things got too dramatic. Emily. There was a lot of hopeful fiction in the comments on the last post about Maggie and Emily becoming a tag team trans girl duo and fighting evil, and I'm sorry to disappoint those of you who got your hopes up, but while Emily did accept Maggie's apology, they float in different circles and Emily quite fairly, I think, isn't really looking for a friendship with my daughter. However, About the screenshots. After a bit of thought, Maggie decided to take the advice of several commenters and talk to Emily before going to the VP. Emily, for her own reasons, decided she didn't want that. Didn't even want a copy. Maggie's keeping them safe in case they're needed down the road. Jenna. Still a superhero. She took a little time and space after things settled down and she was sure Maggie had the support she needed. Maggie had a tough time with that, but her therapist person helped her understand why Jenna might have needed it. Didn't last long, and now they're back to talking pretty much every day. So that's where things are now. Haven't heard anything about Brittany in a couple of months now, so I'm cautiously optimistic that the whole business is behind us, but time will tell, I guess. To those who accuse this of being a creative writing exercise, that's fine. I'm not bothered about whether the whole internet believes it's real. Otherwise, I just hope other parents of trans kids manage to get something positive out of all this. That's all I've got. Much love from all three of us, and big thanks to everyone for helping us through things. Update 6. Hi Abe. I'm posting at the request of my daughter Maggie. Originally, we went to Am I the Idiot? But apparently, we're too frequent flyers for that sub and it was removed. Got some responses that were very validating, but I honestly wouldn't mind having a broader sample. Context: she recently turned 17, and she is trans. Since this post involves her birth name, we're going to pretend it's George. When she came out, my wife's family was wonderfully supportive despite knowing next to nothing about gender journeys. My own family not ideal, but not overly bad, hard to be comfortable. My sister, her aunt, let's call her Bessie, was the biggest hurdle. She and Maggie were very, very close before her transition, probably because Bessie is single without kids. She took the change weirdly personally, and we've been low contact since. Maggie took this hard. She really missed her Aunt Bess, but over time came to accept and mourn the loss. Therapy helped. So, this brings us to her birthday. My mother's health isn't what it used to be, and Maggie is her only grandchild, so she wanted to have a family birthday dinner for her, with all of us. Grand. We checked with Maggie, no pressure, and she said yes. The day arrives, we go to my mom's. My wife couldn't make it due to a work emergency, so it was just me and Mags. We weren't 10 seconds in the door when we heard Bess go, "Is that my Georgie?" from the other room. I almost turned and walked out right then, but Maggie stopped me and told me to let her handle it. I didn't like it, but I said okay. So, when Bessie comes around the corner, Maggie gives her a big hug and goes, "It's so good to see you, Uncle Brian." My sister had a face like a cat's back and I was trying really hard not to laugh, but my dad, bless him, was like, "Well, you walked into that one, Bess," and she walked it back with a half-assed apology and excuses. Dinner went awkwardly, although I loved every damn second of it. Bess mostly used the right name, but whenever she didn't, Maggie would politely call her Uncle Brian again. In the next few days, I heard from both my mother and Bess in the form of voicemails saying Maggie was rude and took the whole thing too far to intentionally embarrass her aunt. My wife thought it was well-deserved but thinks that maybe two wrongs don't make a right and we should have just left. It came up again yesterday, so Maggie said we should ask here. Were we assholes at dinner? Added okay, this post omitted some details because of the "Am I the Idiot?" character limit and there have been recurring questions, so I'm going to address some here. 1. Maggie's transition began 4 years ago, which is when she stopped going by George. Bessie has had a very long time to practice and adjust. She doesn't want to. 2. We went low contact about half a year after Maggie came out to us. She and Aunt Bess had spent the day together, and Bess all but refused to use the right name or pronouns, and Maggie came home a mess. Would have been no contact for a while, but Maggie didn't want that. And for those might have looked at my post history, in fairness, the name hasn't always been Maggie. There were a good 2 years of trying on names before she landed on that one. But Bess has never used any name but George or Georgie, and that's the issue. 3. Bessie is, bizarrely, not ideologically very, very attached to the past. Still transphobia, I know, but just for context. She is stubbornly attached to the hope that Maggie will grow out of this phase. I hate that word. It isn't just Maggie, this is a problem in every area of her life. She's a deeply unhappy and lonely person who floats between complaints about the life she has, and paralyzing nostalgia for yesteryear. My relationship with her was complicated before Maggie was born, although she absolutely adored Maggie pre-transition and spoiled the heck out of her. I wish she'd spent these 4 years learning to love her niece as much as she loved her nephew. 4. About Mom, her behavior this round was transphobic, but that is out of character for her. She was the first to figure things out when Maggie first came out to the family, and she whipped my dad into shape on names and pronouns pretty quick for a woman who had no prior exposure. Her actions here are more about my sister than anything else. As I said, Mom's health is failing and she's terrified that after she and Dad are gone, Bess won't have any family left. She knows Bess was wrong. Heck, I think she even knows she herself was wrong, but she's faced with her own mortality, petrified for her daughter, and picking a deeply misguided way to go about things. It's complicated. Update 7. Hey folks, Maggie and I were waxing nostalgic yesterday and we remembered this account, and she thought it would be nice to give an update on things. To sum up, my last post at a 17th birthday dinner for Maggie, my trans daughter, my sister Aunt Bess, 49F, routinely dead-named her, and Maggie responded by politely calling her Uncle Brian whenever she did. There was wailing and gnashing of teeth, but the Reddit consensus was that my daughter's badass. Here's the link to the post if you want it. I know it's been a bit of a goofy long time, and it was a pretty small post, but there's been a lot. Some good, some significantly shitty. Maggie put me up to this, so blame her. So, let's start with the shitty. My mother passed away late last year. We knew it was coming, but shockingly, that knowledge didn't help much. Don't want to get into the details because this update really isn't about that, but it's relevant. I will say that nothing really prepares you to lose a parent, and my wife is a superhero because without her and Maggie I probably would have just crawled in a hole, never come back out. On the heels of my mom's passing, Aunt Bess had a mild heart attack. She's doing fine now. Recovery was a bitch. I had to get more involved than I honestly wanted to because I wasn't about to let Dad take that all on by himself, and wife pitched in too again. Superhero. And then Maggie is, Jesus H. Christ, 18 now and graduating high school. Something else nothing prepares you for. All that context is to make this point: Bessie finally figured out that Maggie is Maggie for good, and she's actually started making an effort. I think the combination of Mom's death, her own scare, and the fact that Maggie will be going off to university in another city next year kind of made it sink in that if she didn't fix things now, she might never get the chance. I don't know. It's not perfect. And frankly, Bessie has gotten even more insufferable in some ways. But back around Maggie's birthday she sat down with her and gave her an honest-to-God apology. I got it secondhand from Maggie because I wasn't there, but my favorite part of the whole thing is a direct quote from Bess that Maggie gave me word for word. You know, I wanted a niece more than a nephew anyway when you were little, so maybe this trans thing was all my fault from the start. So yeah, the world still revolves around Bessie in her head, but she hasn't used Maggie's dead name once around us since then, and only slipped on pronouns a few times, so I'm starting to believe this is a good thing. And of course, Maggie's overjoyed to have her Aunt Bess back, especially after losing her grandma. So, things are sad, but nice. It's weird. Anyway, that's pretty much it. Maggie says I should tell you that you people are cool, so there you go. Seal of approval.